so many eminent leaders from our own club, all the past presidents, all the guys who are doing so well in their own professions and their companies, who themselves are great leaders. So I feel a little intimidated because they're probably going to ask, who's this young fellow just talking about leadership? We already know more than what he can tell us. However, what I'm going to try to do is, because since I'm a business school professor, I'm going to try to sort of maybe put a framework on leadership, and it'll actually help us reflect on our own leadership style and the way we deal with our own organizations, and look at some of the other ways of dealing, and maybe there's something we can learn from the other methods of leadership. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully it'll work. At the moment, it's, yeah, 1 second. All right, is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible, yes.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll just put this on slideshow mode and we start. Okay, good. So let's talk about how to be a great leader. Like I said, you guys already know a lot about this themselves, but let's talk about a couple of, let's say, myths about leadership. Now, when you think of great leaders, when you look at what the media says, they say, look at guys like Jeff Bezos, let's look at Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, multi-billionaires. They've started companies from zero and become really great. And these are the sort of leaders you should admire. And you tell your kids, okay, be like this sort of person, be a Steve Jobs, be the next Jeff Bezos. But what is interesting, and this is something that most people are not aware of, is that most of these guys are considered toxic leaders, right? To give an example, so Steve Jobs actually used to walk into his own company, look at engineers who had, let's say, worked, let's say, for a year on a project and not communicate with them before. He said, look, I hate this project, close it down immediately without actually checking the background, totally demotivating his engineers. And very often, in fact, as you know, Steve Jobs was kicked out of his own company in the middle before he came back to wealth because he did not know how to handle people. Same thing with Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is considered to be one of the most autocratic, most toxic leaders in terms of his own company, because he actually tells employees, okay, you cannot have more than a half an hour lunch break, and we will time you. Every minute that you spend over half an hour for your lunch break, we will deduct your pay. So these guys are constantly burnt out and constantly demotivated. Similarly with Elon Musk, I mean, like, again, he's actually known for coming up with these random tweets about his own company, which raise and drop the stock price randomly based on his own views. And he's actually been seen smoking a marijuana cigarette in an interview live. So, not the sort of stable person that you would think of. So then you ask the question is that how come these guys being toxic leaders are doing so well? Why have they succeeded? Understand one thing, all these people have worked in the unique Silicon Valley environment where they have a lot of venture capital money coming in. They are very, very good at design, very, very good at coming up with great products. They're horrible to other people, but they're great at that. Outside the Silicon Valley environment, where there's a lot of funding and focus on great product design, this type of leadership does not work in any other part of the world, which is why you don't see the same toxic leaders in many other parts of the world who are successful, right? So the idea is that let's keep the myths about leadership away and let's talk about who the types of leaders that exist, right? There are many leadership types. There's no one perfect type. Let's explore what they are. The most common one, and this you see very often in the classic Indian family business Lala company, is an autocratic leader. That means that the boss is be all and end all. Most of the time, his employees just say yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, for whatever decision is made without actually questioning it. And very often it's more in terms of saying top-down approach. The boss says jump, and people say, how high should I jump, without questioning it. So autocratic leadership does work in certain environments. It's not working so much nowadays in modern companies, especially when you have knowledge workers. However, whenever you are, let's say, running a military campaign, most military leaders tend to be great autocratic leaders because that's the time when the army men or the army jawans have to just follow orders blindly and go and fight for their country without any questions. So military situations, emergency situations, if the company is doing very, very badly and you need to turn it around quickly, sometimes you're an autocratic leader to just order people around and get things done without asking for their input. So that's the autocratic leadership style. The bureaucratic is one I think that all of us who have dealt with the government have dealt with. The thing is that classic case is that there's a classic middle manager or a middle-level bureaucrat who said, look, I'm just going to follow the rules blindly. I don't care about your problem. I don't care about what the people below me think. I will just follow the actual rules and traditions, right? Unlike the autocratic leader who comes up with his own ideas and changes the rules as he or she wants, the bureaucrat said, look, I'm just going to follow the rules blindly. I will not be flexible and I will just follow processes. In fact, this is probably the least popular type of leadership that people like us have to deal with when we deal with some government employees. But it works in very traditional organizations, and a lot of government employees have done very well being bureaucrats because they keep their head low and just follow orders. All right. This again is a bit more like the typical American way of working. A transactional leadership is saying that, look, only if you perform, I will reward you. If you do not perform, I will kick you out. In fact, for example, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Welch of General Motors, General Electric, was very famous for having this model of management that says that every year he will analyze the performance of his employees from top 10% to bottom 10%. Anybody who went in the top 10% was fired from the company without any questions asked. So he came up with a very, very competitive environment in General Electric, and he actually got just the top performers, and the bottom performers were kicked out. No interest in developing them, no interest in making them work harder. It's more like you're either good or you're not, you're in or you're out. There's no other options. It started creating a very toxic culture in General Electric, because then what happened was that a lot of people kept on leaving, and even though General Electric was doing well, let's say even 10 years ago, today it's actually bankrupt in a lot of cases because that culture is not working as effectively for knowledge workers, because knowledge workers want to believe that they're learning and coming up with new things. They don't want the transactional culture where it's either perform or die. It's a very, very American Silicon Valley finance way of looking at things, right? Now, this is the other thing, the exact other side. So you take, let's say, this guy is Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo. When he started Oyo Rooms, he was like 25 years old. This is a case where very often the person is, let's say, the entrepreneur, he's come up with a great product, but he does not have the maturity or management bandwidth to deal with a company. So he hires a lot of these senior managers or senior CXOs or CEOs or things like that. And he said, look, I don't know anything. I will allow you guys to develop the company. I will just be there as a figurehead, but I will let you guys run the company the way you want. It works very well in early stage startups, and also when you have a very young founder who's not able to really manage other people. Because for a lot of techies, for example, coming up with a great technology product does not mean you're a great manager or you can manage a team very well. So we've seen a lot of startups started by these young 25-year-old IT engineer types, great product, but the company crashes and burns because they've not been able to manage the team or grow it properly. So this works for a very short period of time, but it doesn't allow the organization to grow, mainly because at some point the organization looks to the leader for direction, and the leader can't say, okay, I'm stepping back and you guys decide what works, right? So the laissez-faire type of leadership is not something that you can do for long. A democratic, this is actually interesting. So Dhirubhai Ambani, as you all know, was a 10th pass student, but how did he become successful? And this is something that was very key to his leadership profile, is that he said, look, I will give a general direction to the company, but I will listen to my managers very deeply. Unlike the autocratic leader who says, look, you just follow my orders blindly, or like the laissez-faire leader who says, look, I don't know anything, you guys decide. He said, look, I will actually hire good quality people. I will listen to what they have to say. However, I will make the final decision after listening to the group. It may or may not be with consensus, but the point is I will make sure I've listened to others before I decide. Now, this works mostly in a lot of companies today, especially if you are in a knowledge work environment, in the white collar service industry, in the financial industry, in the consulting or things like that, or even manufacturing. However, one thing you need to realize is that taken to the extreme, a democratic approach tends to slow down decision making, because if the leader has to work quickly, he says, no, wait, I'm not going to come up with a quick decision. I will talk to the 10 people around me, then decide. And that could slow things down. So it's a great method of leadership, but taken to the extreme, it actually can slow down the organization's growth of the path, right? Unlike the autocratic leader who just says, okay, I'm just going to decide the direction and let's just do it. Strategic is more like if you are, I mean, again, very few of us actually get to that level where we can just sit back and say, look, I run this conglomerate like the Tata Group, or I run this massive group. I don't want to get involved in day-to-day activities. So therefore, I have a lot of middle managers or senior managers doing my work. I will give the general direction of the group. I will say, okay, this is what needs to be achieved. However, you guys decide how you want to achieve it, right? So this again does work for very large organizations or very well set organizations which have an existing culture and have been there for many years. But again, the issue is that you start having bottlenecks and inefficiencies over time because every level starts being more strategic and they start slowing down decisions as it goes up the value chain. So it works very well for all large family business companies, multi-company businesses, but it's not something that the majority of us can actually implement, especially if you run one organization or a small organization than the Tatas, which is probably most of us. Okay, this is actually one of my favorites. So this, of course, is Gandhiji. Now, Gandhiji actually his purpose was to coach. So if you look at when you say Gandhiji was actually leading the independence movement in India, right? He said, look, the thing is that our purpose is a commonality of direction, right? We want to make sure that there's, let's say that British leave India. However, he made a point to start coaching or developing Jawaharlal Nehru. He started developing all the various other leaders. Interestingly, he said, look, I just want you to follow a certain lifestyle. I said, I want you to start wearing Swadeshi, Khadi, do your own spinning and follow a certain simplistic lifestyle that will lead the direction of the company, of the country. He said, I will not give you mandates as to how to manage the Ministry of Home Affairs or the Ministry of Finance or things like that. If you notice, Gandhiji was never in government. He was the coach of government. It's like saying that, let's say if you look at a football team, the coach never plays, but he is behind to nurture and make sure that the team performs to the utmost. So this is a coaching type of leadership. And again, this is something good for somebody who is not involved in day-to-day activities of the company, but is sort of like a mentor or has a mindset of helping his team, but lets them achieve the goals and he just supports them to sort of grow. This, in my mind, is actually one of the most effective types of leadership that work in the corporate world. Transformational leadership. So even though, Deepak Park, we go to see, most of he had to build HDFC Bank into a group that was fantastic. But interestingly, a lot of the employees, including Aditya Puri, who just resigned as the CEO, were people with him who worked with him for the last 20, 25 years. So obviously these people started when the bank was a very small environment, and the bank grew along with the employees. He ensured that every employee, so like for example, let's say if you are an employee who, let's say, can deal with, let's say, one bank location, now has to deal with multiple bank locations, and you don't do well with that. If you are a transactional leadership, like I was talking about, let's say Mark Zuckerberg, the boss will say, okay, fine, get out. I will hire someone from outside who can manage the multiple banks, and I don't care if you can do it or not. A transformational leader says that, okay, I will allow you to learn. I will make efforts to give you all the best learning, all the best support, such that you can move from being a one bank manager to a multi-bank manager. So I want to transform you. And that develops a lot of loyalty in your own team to make sure that as your company grows, you grow as well. So the idea is that this is something that not all of us can do, but I think transformation leadership tends to be something that is performed by well-run companies, especially for single units where you want your people to be loyal and you want them to grow. Of course, the downside is that very often individuals may not be right for the company and you may spend a lot of time trying to develop them, but they are finally not right and you have to make the tough decision to tell them to move out versus the transactional guy who said, look, if you're not good, get out. So again, see, all these leadership styles, there's no perfect one style, right? Because the thing is that each style works for each situation. So for example, if you are, let's say, an army general, it'll be silly for you to be a coach, let's say a coaching leadership, because you need to make sure these guys follow orders. Conversely, if you are, let's say, in an organization which has multiple roles, right? Let's say, for example, like, let's say if you're working in a large conglomerate, you can't get involved in each and every employee's issue. You can't get involved in transforming them. You give more strategic direction. So again, you need to understand what is the sort of leader that you want to be based on these profiles and what you are doing. Does it work for you? Does it work for the environment that you're in? Because also I know that a lot of us are working in different organizations. So one is our primary organization, let's say the hospital or the company that we are working with. Also, we are working in Rotary projects. We're doing other things where our leadership is needed. So different mindsets for different environments. The idea would be to get the best of each of these different leadership styles and apply the one that's relevant to the environment that you're in. The worst thing to do is take the same leadership style and use it across all environments. You need to make sure that understand the environment that you're in and what's the most appropriate leadership style for that environment. All right. So again, I don't actually have to tell this to you guys because lots of you are great leaders. But however, this is actually more. Let me talk a bit about my experience also in Rotary. So as many of you know, I'm a past president, and I actually became the president when I was 36 years old. This is way back. I mean, in the I think the early mid 2000s. What was great that way? So even though I was thrust into a leadership role at that point, I had a lot of support from people around me, like Mohan, Atul, Bipin, Bimal, all these great guys who are part of my team and helped me grow, and also people who are leading the various committees. What I discovered is that even though I was, I just was thrust in the role of the president, my leadership skills developed a lot while I was the president of Rotary. Why? Of our club. Mainly because I was able to learn from so many other leaders, but more importantly, unlike the organization that I was running, where if I say something, the employees say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. In a Rotary committee, or let's say in a Rotary project, you cannot order people around. You have people who are as qualified or even more qualified than you, you need to convince them to help to work together in projects. So dealing with other people, extending your leadership skills when you realize that, okay, maybe there's a more traditional member in my committee, I need to work with him in a certain way. Here's a young, maybe ex-Rotaract, a new member coming in more enthusiastic, I need to work with them in a certain way. You're developing your leadership skills by getting involved in Rotary projects. I think most of us, I think Abuzar, Vicky, Manoj, all you guys will probably agree is that the fact that we were as presidents on the ladder or involved in projects has helped us translate that into our own organization. We've learned stuff with the project work that we do that has helped us in our own organization and helped develop us ourselves. So I think, obviously, I think it's more in terms of saying that if you really want to develop your leadership skills outside your organization, frankly, nothing beats our club and the projects and the work that we do. And I'm sure that all our past presidents and committee heads, which I think is probably most of you guys agree. So yeah, so that's it. So basically the bottom line is that leadership is a mindset. Understand the environment that you are being a leader in, understand what is the best leadership style that will work for that environment, and then work around it. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. You just have to be able to take those 8 different frameworks and see what is relevant to this organization or the environment that I'm in right now. Great. So I think I'm going to stop talking from now and open to questions. Hopefully I didn't take too long.
No, not at all. There was too less. But since you're finished, we will take that question and answer.
Yeah, I'll also stop screen sharing and get the whole gang. 1 second. How do I stop screen sharing? Are you still seeing my screen or?
Yes, we're still seeing your screen.
We're still seeing.
Okay, 1 second. Hold on. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Now you're.
Okay. So let's have a conversation. In fact, feel free to say that, Akhil, I think you're wrong, and this is what I think of leadership here. So let's have a conversation around this.
Akhil, can I? May I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Akhil, I wanted to know, where do you get your case studies from? Because when you're teaching, you need to be always up to date with case studies, that are relevant and contemporary. How do you get your case studies, Akhil?
So I think, so if you're talking more in the environment of the teaching environment, you have to identify what is it that you're trying to present, right? So in the case of, let's say, if you're trying to teach a base concept. So for example, you say that, okay, I want to teach the 4 P's of marketing as a basic concept. Now these are issues that have been there for the last 25 years. So therefore, there are a lot of cases talking about the 4 P's of marketing. However, when you're looking at more contemporary cases, let's say, for example, you want to talk about what happened with Cafe Coffee Day or what happened with, let's say, a more recent case. Those you'll have to either look, there are a lot of cases floating around. So if you, there are some websites, I don't remember where they are, do a search for Indian case studies, you'll find a lot of them available for free. However, the most extreme case where we have like literally, we have our teachers sort of defining cases from what has happened last month, those case studies don't exist. So they have to sort of take examples from news media, from industry reports and construct their own case study. But frankly speaking, the best case study is really two things. One is define what the situation is, define what the problem is, and third thing is what would you do in that situation. This is what, let's say, Siddhartha Ray did during Cafe Coffee Day. If you were in his position, what would you do? So that's it.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Akhil, Akhil, I want to know if you can let all know, like where you have your the various courses which you're offering, which I just mentioned. Where do you run your classes? And now at the moment it must be virtual, but where how many students totally you have under your Sage Foundation or your other trust, like which I think in Mulund you have your one center.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let me take a more step back, because this is actually something that talks about leadership for students in general, because obviously when we are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, we have a different view of leadership, a different view of the organization. But let's talk about, let's say, how do you develop a student, let's say our kids or let's say our grandkids to be leaders, right? So so my doctorate is actually in employability. So I like to joke with most people, my doctorate is I'm not a useful doctor like, let's say, Lotika, Hamza, or Arvind, where I help other people. I just write articles and write research. But what my doctorate said is that when you're looking at creating a leader at the low level, most employers want to hire leaders who have graduated from college or things like that. So we said, what does leadership mean at the junior level, right? Because you don't have the strategic mindset, but what is it that gives, what's the personality of a leader? So for a young person, we realize is that there are roughly 4 or 5 different traits. One is definitely you have to be proactive. That means you have to have the ability to not wait for orders. You have to proactively just keep on going out and doing things. You try, you fail, you try, you fail, but you keep on moving forward. The second thing is that professional work ethic. That means that if you promise, you make sure you deliver. Unfortunately, most colleges most our education system tends to make it less professional, because they say if you give your assignment late, show up at class late, we don't care. Once you join a company, you better make sure that if the office says you show up on time, you better show up at 9 a.m. They don't care if there's rain or problems happening, you show up at 9 a.m. If the boss says you have to do an assignment by Friday, 3 p.m., you better make sure the assignment is there. You can't chillax. So that professionalism is very critical. The third thing is the ability to solve problems. There's a concept called critical thinking, where you take, let's say, an issue and you come up with a viewpoint. To give you an example, most of the forwards that we get on WhatsApp are not based on critical thinking. People don't read the forwards. They just forward and say, I'm not going to apply my mind to it, which is why you realize that almost 95% of WhatsApp news forwards tend to be fake or irrelevant. Why? Because when you apply critical thinking to any WhatsApp forward, you say, does this make sense? Does what is being told, does it look like, let's say, it's real news? If it looks like real news, can I check other sources online, credible sources like Times of India or Google, where it says this news is actually verified? Use your critical thinking. Very often, when you are a young person getting into an organization, you have to deal with so many different facts, so many different opinions. You have to apply your mind as to what makes sense and use your critical thinking ability. So that's the third thing that everyone looks for. Fourth, and it's very important, is the ability to work well in teams. The thing is that you cannot do your job by yourself. You always have to make sure that the people around you are working together with you to help you achieve your goal, whether it's an assignment or work. Again, in education, that tends to be silly. When they say that if you're a student and you're collaborating with others, that means you're cheating. Because most of our education says you have to study for exams by yourself, mug it up and not deal with others. So in a way, the reason why there's such a dearth of employability from college to companies is because the education system drives out teamworking, drives out professionalism, drives out critical thinking, because critical thinking is more like you apply your mind. Education says, okay, this is a textbook, this is the answer, don't think. So what we're trying to do basically, to get your point, Abuzar, is that we are basically trying to take kids from various colleges, not just in Bombay, but now with online, we're doing online. And we're developing these leadership skills in these kids, along with training them in jobs for banks and jobs for digital marketing and other industries. But the point is that most employers tell us that, look, even if you don't teach them much in terms of the theoretical knowledge, give me a boy or a girl who has these personality traits, who have these leadership traits, and I will hire them. So which is why a lot of our training is based on just 30% of domain knowledge and 70% is developing these skills, trying to overcome the the damage that the education system has done for these kids earlier, right? So yeah, so right now we're doing it for thousands of kids around India, and some of them are kids who can pay, some of the kids who can't pay. In fact, Ashwin Shah, if he's on this group or not, but he actually was saying that let's roll it out with some of the kids through Rotary, and I think we did try to get some of the kids who are not able to pay for education to come out. We train them for free because it's funded by our funding partners, and we get them jobs in banks. But the key thing is developing the leadership skill at that level.
Akhil, Manoj here.
Yeah.
See, our traditional education system has been where the students simply, absorb or simply hear what the teacher has to say without really,
right.
questioning it, without really arguing about it, against it.
Right.
That is where the critical thinking part of it we have lost in the process. While the modern process is where you respect, you argue respectfully, of course, but you try to, make a case about it. They can have a different point of view. And there's not, so many aspects. There's nothing wrong or nothing right. There's no right or wrong answer. Right. How do we bring in that change in the education system?
So it's interesting, right? So let me talk about one in terms of changing the education system, and one is what can we do for our own kids to make them a better thinking, right? So I could probably assume that probably at least 95% of us who are on this call today are products of the Indian education system. We all went to school in India, went to college in India. But let me ask you a question. Where did you develop your critical thinking from? Why are you all not products of the Indian education system where you're all boring robots with no purpose in life? What happened is that even if you look at your own class, right, your own graduates, and I'm sure some of you have been for your school and college reunions, you actually see your other classmates who graduated from the same class, but you may have done better or differently than some others. You see people who have done very well and people who have done very badly from the same class. Why is that? Because very often, if you go to see, is that only 20% of the kids' time is spent in school or college. Because if you count weekends, you count summer, winter holidays, you count government holidays, you count the time that they go back home in the evenings to be with the family, only 20-25% of the child's time is spent in school or college. Most of their time is spent with you. So therefore, if you want to develop certain traits in your kids, you have to develop the traits yourself. So for example, like let's say, it's like how kids are. They will all kids will copy what you do, not what you tell them. So therefore, if you are constantly forwarding stupid WhatsApp messages to other people and not thinking, why would you expect your kids to think? However, if they see you thinking and saying, look, I actually want to use my brain. Let me start reading. Let me start understanding. Let me question every fact that's come to me. Then you will develop a critical thinking mindset, and your kid will do that themselves. Ultimately, they will follow what you do, not what you say. So, and don't forget is that most of your child's development is based on you. And I'm sure a lot of you also believe, I'm sure you also felt that even when you were growing up, even today, very often when there's a decision to be made, you say, okay, what would my mom have done in this case? What would my dad have done in this case, right? For example, very often you follow the ethics or the mindset of your own parents, and that travels down to your kids. So frankly, it's like, not a very used word, the thing is, develop your own kids in these capabilities more than the education system. Education system can only do so much, not everything for your kid.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
You think this new education policy is going to be any better?
Well, I mean, the great thing about these policies is that they sound good on paper. But one thing we need to understand is that the education in India is what's called a concurrent subject. That means that even though the center may define a policy, the execution of that happens at the state and the local level, right? To give an example, remember there was this Right to Education Act that came out around 5-6 years ago, right? Where they said that at least 25% of the kids in class have to be at least from the under-resourced community. How many schools have implemented it? Not many, right? Or even in the case of, let's say, the CBSE board came up with something called continuous comprehensive evaluation around 6 years ago, where they said that we're not going to evaluate the kids only on the final exams. We're going to start taking the kids in terms of how their leadership, how their sports are, how the development is happening. But most of the schools didn't actually implement it. And unfortunately, you cannot force schools to implement something as long as the parents are just coming to school. So what happens is that the NEP, the National Education Policy Committee guideline, unfortunately, the government has not come up with a plan of action as to how it will be implemented at the state level. How it will, what can a school do? A school is used to having teachers who are just training to the exam and to the textbook and the standard model, how will we get the teachers to be trained? How will we change the examination system? All those answers are not there. So I would not be, unfortunately, I'm not very hopeful that major change will happen in the education system.
Arif has a question. Arif, go ahead with your question, please. Arif.
After that, I would like to ask a question after this, please.
Arif has a raised hand. Arif, go ahead.
Sure.
I'll ask after that.
Sure.
Who's Arif? Arif Toshniwal, I think someone there who wants to know.
That's
sorry, I log in from my son's account. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So Akhil, coming back to leadership, it's the type of leaderships which you spoke about. But my question is, I don't know whether it's women, that sometimes we battle with the kind of relationship we want with our employees, whether to get too casual or too personal, too familiar, too professional.
Correct.
So, some people you hear are like very good friends with their people. They're like patting the back of even their peons and watchmen. And sometimes it's very disciplinarian. So I, at a personal level, battle with a lot of issues as to where to draw a line. Because, you feel sometimes if you get too personal, too professional, too familiar, then you feel you're being taken advantage of. And sometimes you feel when you're very distant and all, then you don't even get a smile in the morning or something.
Correct.
So this is one thing, if you could shed some light on, would help us.
Like with most issues of leadership, there's no black and white answer. It's not like, say, should you be very close or should we be very distant, right? So again, you have to look at the environment around you. So let's take the example of, let's say, should you be close to the office boy, or let's say the watchman outside, right? Now, obviously, as a leader, you say that obviously if someone come and you say, you greet them in the day and say, how are you? You know, things like that, just a normal politeness. And let's say if somebody has a death in the family, you ask them, and of course you do try to say, maybe happy birthday, wish them happy birthday. However, if they start getting too familiar and they start talking in a way that you feel is not giving you respect, then you sort of sometimes have to step back and tell them, look, the thing is that, yes, I like you, but this is going too far. So again, it depends on case-to-case basis, right? So there may be some employees that you get close to, some you don't get close to. However, as a leader, you also have to come across as impartial. So I would say, so in fact, my daughters call this, always tell me that, whenever I meet their friends, they always say that you're awkwardly nice. That means you're nice to them, but you're awkward. Because obviously me as a father, like I've got my 22, 23-year-old kids, I'm with their friends. The friends don't want to hang out with me, right? But I also can't come in and start showing that, hey, I'm a cool dad. So the best way to be awkwardly nice is to say, look, yes, be nice to them, ask general questions how they are, but don't get too close that way, because they, frankly, at the end of the day, they're just teaching you as a senior person. So again, bottom line, case to case, you will know the barriers. There's no right answer or wrong answer.
Akhil, I have a question.
After Anil. Anil, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You described the various leadership styles, and industry today, everybody, each of us has a very different style of behaving with people and leadership style. How do you, as an institutional person, shock-proof your students? Because what they're taught in school and what they're taught in in the education framework, case studies, it doesn't happen when you go to an organization.
Correct.
The management style is different. The way that they are talked to is different.
Absolutely true.
And sometimes they spend 2 or 3 months in a shock state.
Right.
Because
exactly.
they try to apply what is taught in a case study, which doesn't apply to the institution. How do you shock-proof them?
So, all right. So interestingly, what we do, and again, this may not apply to all organizations, but let me talk about the specific case in my case, and then I'll talk about a general thing we can do. What we do as much as possible, we know these kids are coming to an environment where they are not in professionalism, they're not team workers, they mostly are not proactive because they've been taught not to be that, right? What we do immediately, we give them the shock in our college. We don't wait them to get the shock in corporate. That means that if the student walks in late to class, we lock the door at sharp at 9 a.m. Like if the student comes at 9:05, he can't walk and say, sir, can I come in? No. You either come in at 9 a.m. or you're out of the class and your attendance is docked. And if you don't get more than 85% attendance in the class, then you are failing that year. Things like that. So in a way, you start being a little more draconian, because what happens that first couple of times the students say, the train was late, it was raining, I couldn't show up on time. But you ask yourself the question is that if you have to catch a flight, you very rarely will miss a flight. You will say, look, I know that there may be rain in the morning when I come from home. So therefore, I will try to make an effort to come in, let's say, have a buffer for 20 minutes, half an hour. So therefore, I show up on time at 9 o'clock. So in a way, the more, I won't say the word draconian, the more you make the environment more corporate, the more they are willing to, the more willing to adjust to it. So we are very strict about discipline if somebody is not disciplined. So things like that, small things that way. However, one thing we also realize is that more than the environment, we tell them is that, look, we cannot cushion you from any shock. Because remember, you may go to a company where you have a very unfair boss. Don't assume that your boss is going to be nice to you. I mean, our teachers are nice to you when boss may not care about if you live or die, right? So what we say is that forget about the fact of preparing yourself for every shock. Understand the fundamental philosophy, and that's called grit. Basically, assume that you'll be thrown in an environment which is undefined, maybe unfair to you, but be willing to try, fail, keep on moving forward. No matter how many hits you get every day, no matter how bad your day will be, always wake up the next day and say, look, tomorrow's a new day, what can I do better? If you give them that mindset, and that is true for all of our kids, if our kids are able to deal with failure and problems, we as parents tend to overparent our kids. We say, I don't want my son or daughter to suffer the way I did. You are actually handicapping your kids, because if you're not letting your kids actually deal with failure, deal with problems at the beginning, once you're not there, how are they going to deal with the outside world? Yes. We've seen so many cases of kids who are saying that, hey, I don't want to go unless there's an air conditioned office, or I don't want to go unless this is right for me. You are handicapping your own kids. And frankly, you see a lot of cases where there are kids who are coming from these low middle class families who don't have that parental cushion, who actually may be doing better than your kids because they've dealt with adversity, setbacks much earlier. So, like I said, don't cushion your kids from shock. Just give them the mindset, look, shocks are not bad. Try, fail, keep on moving, learn new things, and that's it. That's the best thing you can do.
Thanks, Akhil. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rahul.
Okay, after you, if I can make a
Sure. Akhil, what's your take on this coaching business? It's I've often asked this question, and the teaching as it is of now.
Right.
The parent is rushing to put the child to accounting class, English class, this class, that class later. So it's so much of peer pressure, and there's so much of. I mean, how does one sort of look at this? I mean, in our days, after you finished school, you bloody went onto the playing field compulsory. Your attendance was taken again, and we all passed. Okay. We didn't get 90s those days because you sort of. But how do you sort of address this? Because it's really becoming such a pressure. I tell you this because when I was in corporate life, one of my people asked for an educational loan. I got so happy and excited that he wants to do something different. So he says, "Look, sir, to be very fair with you, I'm going to have to take up a part-time course, obviously, but the chunk of this is to pay for coaching."
Right.
So I asked him, "What is this?" He has to go to these classes and that classes because nobody teaches, etc.
Right.
I just thought I'd leave this thought with you and see what your take on this is.
So it's like this. The thing is that it's like, let's say, alcohol and cigarettes, right? We know it's bad for you, but as long as the demand exists, there will be suppliers, right? Now, let's talk about two things, right? So when you look at the coaching class industry, right, the ones that tend to be most popular, the ones who do the most, are the ones that do training for IIT exams, medical entrance, and things like that. Mainly because the entry to an IIT or an IIM is the number of seats. Let's say the 100 seats, there'll be like 10,000 people applying for it.
I understand.
And the only measure of admitting a student is not based on their personality or other things. It's more like, how much have you scored? Have you scored 96.5% or 96.8%? And have you got it, right? So as long as you have that linear method of getting into these institutions, you will have the coaching industry, and those are the ones who are doing very well. However, as a parent, or as, let's say, someone who knows kids, you need to say, look, the thing is that don't assume that success only happens if you join IIT or you join this medical college, thing like that. Understand there are many more options out there. The worst thing would be say that if you try to create a kid who's creative, who's more, let's say, empathetic, got different intelligences, and try to force them into that IIT mode, that's the worst thing. What you need to do is understand that, look, the kid can actually make a lot of money, let's say, and make a lot of money as, let's say, in the hospitality business today, in technology, so many other areas. It's not that only IIT, IIM is the only path to success. So once you let the kid be aware that, look, there are many other career options which are not as, how should I say, as driven as this coaching class model, number one. Number two, even let's say for medical entrance today, the thing is a lot of kids are now going to Russia, other places where the medical education is cheaper and not so difficult to get in, and the quality is very good. So I think once you let the parent or yourself realize there are many more career options out there, away from this coaching class industry, you're fine. just finding, getting into schools, definitely do not put your kid in coaching classes unless maybe up before, let's say, the 9th or 10th standard or 11th or 12th standard, because especially you want to get to those high-end colleges. But the worst thing to do is try to get your kid into coaching in the 5th standard, 6th standard.
Right.
This is the time to sort of open them up and let them explore things. It doesn't matter if they get 60% or 55% or 65% in the 5th standard, right? You as a parent have to be able to switch off your mind to other parents saying, hey, my kid got 95% in the 5th standard. What did your kid get? There's always people around you who try to drag you down. I mean, the best thing is that just ignore them. You know what's best for your child, and that's the best thing to do.
I have a question, Akhil.
Yeah, sure.
So I see today's young little toddlers getting digitalized in their education a lot.
Right.
So coming back to the toddlers again, asking what is the right thing to do? The world is today open that it's like it's like an octopus. You can learn so much with just an iPad in your hand.
Right.
There's us parents doing all the time, working with our digital gadgets. So yes, what is right thing to do? Give or not give?
Okay, so let me talk about a very famous quote that I really love here. There's actually a guy who said that, this new technology is, if the kids start adopting to it as part of their life, they will lose their ability to think, they'll lose their ability to socialize, and they will lose, I cry for the next generation. This quote was given by Plato in 2000 BC, when we were talking about the invention of writing. Because prior to writing, people used to memorize stuff and quote things. So Plato thought that if people start writing things down, they will lose their ability to forget, right? Now, a lot of us remember when we were growing up, there was always a concern in the 1980s, 1990s. Arey, these kids are going to look at TV. We were the kids. We were watching TV, and all our parents said, Arey, beta, you're looking at so much TV. Your mind will go to mush. You will never be able to think. We survived and we got okay, right? See, the thing is that even if you look at, even before that with radio, any new technology, microwaves when they started, these waves coming out to you and you'll all get cancer. Remember one thing is that any new you can't stop technology, right? However, what happens at any time there's a new technology, there's always media hype that says, what's the danger of that technology? So you get caught up and say, I will choose not to adopt that technology with my kid because I'm concerned about the dangers. So like with most things in life, like eating or exercising, moderation is the key. So do not keep your kid away from technology or social media or anything like that. However, make sure that their work, what they do on it is in moderation. And introduce them to the joys of the outside world. I mean, post-COVID, introduce them to the joys of people. Interestingly, my own daughters, they're active on social media. However, they always make it a point to meet their friends and talk to them as well. Because, trust me, people have to socialize. I mean, at the end of the day, Zoom is great, but you also need to deal with people in real life. So I think moderate. Don't be scared of technology, but keep it in moderation like anything in life. Your kids are smart enough. They won't, they're not going to go downhill like Plato's kids didn't.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I have a comment if I can.
Can I? Sorry, Deepak.
Sure, Paulo.
No. Go ahead, Uncle. I'll speak to you. I'll speak after.
Don't call me uncle yet.
Sorry. I forgot.
Hi, Rahul, Uncle. I want to hear you. What do you have to say? I want to hear your wisdom.
Two observations, frankly, from what Anil had raised. About the youngsters getting a shock when they enter the corporate world. Right. One is, I think, the weakness of many of our professional courses, especially management, is that most of the case studies that we teach are Western country cases.
True.
I don't think we have developed enough of the Indian case studies. In fact, I practiced this when I was teaching at the Bajaj Institute, where I didn't develop what we call the case studies, but what we call the illustration studies. So just small incidents, small illustrations to prove a narrow point. And I think that got across much more. So if with that kind of a background, I'm wondering if your society and your education institutes can actually sort of indulge in developing more and more Indian case studies, especially in the field of management. Okay. And the other observation which I have learned about is most educational institutes train their students to think that they are better. Whereas I think they should be teaching them that they are better trainable to be good. So as opposed to you are good because you have passed out from HR college or KC college or Bajaj Institute or IIM.
Correct.
But you are better trainable to be good because you have passed out from these prestigious and good institutions. So I'm wondering what the philosophy of your schools and your institutions are.
So let me ask, maybe answer the second question first and talk about the first question, right? So when you talk about the kids, also don't forget very often the kids from the elite institutions, very often their mindset is defined by their parents as well. Because no matter what you say in the institution, you can say that, okay, look, the thing is that you'll have to go out and deal with shocks and things like that. But if the kid goes back home and the kid tells the parent, you know, this teacher told me that day, then the parents said, beta, don't worry, you are brilliant because you're going to this college and things like that. So in a way you have, very often the home environment tends to influence the kid's mindset. And frankly, nothing beats actually getting out there and getting that shock. No matter how much we tell the kids that, okay, there are shocks in the world, and we give them that environment inside the institution, nothing beats real life. It's like, let's say, reading about driving on a book versus actually driving and dealing with potholes and cows and whatnot. Nothing can prepare you for that. So all we basically say is that, and very often you realize, and you probably, I'm sure, have hired people from top colleges. Once they get into a group where other people from other colleges are there and they realize that they're doing very badly because of attitude, they say, I don't want to do this versus that, they start fixing themselves up. Because see, don't forget, all of us have actually been through this 30, 35, 25 years ago. We've all had the same situation where we came from decent institutions. We all had a certain inflated view of ourselves, and we got the first shock of cold water that, and we now have succeeded with that. So I think it's not, you can't overemphasize the fact that shock will exist, but that's what we do. The second thing is that actually there are a lot of Indian case studies which are coming out. In fact, the IIMs have come up with some great case studies. So a lot of colleges are promoting case studies, but it's a classic case, and Rahul, you know this, jo dikhta hai, bikta hai. So the thing is that because the American colleges are better funded, they are better at promoting their stuff onto these online journals, or these official journals like Nature, Elsevier. So therefore, they promote themselves a lot more than the Indian institutions. However, talking about Suchitra's earlier point, do a search online for Indian case studies. There are a lot of them available for free. And there's some really good stuff talking about Indian environment that way. But you'll have to make the effort to search for it versus, just get a smart sales guy to sell it to you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have a time for one more question? Can I ask?
Think Deepak has an observation. No? Deepak?
I just have
Deepak, sorry.
Deepak.
Actually, even if the meeting's over, I'm happy to stick on for longer just to chat anyway.
Akhil, your talk was just superb.
Thank
and
you.
I recently read a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, which actually
Great.
about what you said, which is an amazing book. And one comment which would be interesting is when I finished school and I went to Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai, Shankar Nethralaya basically changed my life. The funny part is it didn't change it in terms of ophthalmology knowledge. So when I went there, it's because it being a spiritual organization, one Swami type of a person came and spoke to us and he said, oh, you people are lucky. You're going to learn to be good. You're going to learn to be on time. You're going to learn to be neat in the files. And as a 20-year-old, I thought this man is, a really old man and he needs to go back and I need to finish my ophthalmology and go back to Bombay. And 5 years later, when I left Shankar Nethralaya, I remembered this man. And basically whatever he said was true. I learned ophthalmology, by the way, and it is something like you said, that real education is not really, solving a problem on an exam thing. It's so these other value systems that probably matter more.
Correct.
But thank you so much.
Just one more point on Deepak on your book. So actually, Angela Duckworth's book Grit is actually one of the central keys of our education model. Another book that you might like, that if you like that thing, is called The Growth Mindset by a researcher called Carol Dweck, which talks about the idea of, actually this is something that all of you should imply with your kids as well. There's something called a fixed mindset and one is a growth mindset. The fixed mindset says that my capabilities, my talents, my intelligence is of a certain level. So therefore, if I don't find maths, if I find maths hard, I will avoid any mathematical based problems and I will just stick to what I'm good at. A growth mindset says that, look, I will learn. That means my talents, my limitation, my current skill set is not permanent. I can keep on developing the skill set. So let's say as a child said that I find math problems hard. I refuse to say I'm dyslexic or I've got dyscalculia. I will make the effort to work extra hard to solve that math problem. So all of us, if you implement the growth mindset into your case, to say that there's nothing that's hard. What is just hard is the ability to make an effort to succeed it, but face all challenges. So growth mindset is something that would be great for all your kids to read, or at least you read and implement.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anil.
Last.
Just, I don't want to go beyond your time, but I just wanted to ask a question. Akhil, you've been, imparting a lot of knowledge, and the young children get a lot of benefit from what you say. But what happens when you're interacting with people from the industry? Let's say you have an MD of a company or a chairman of a company,
right,
and they advise you to, give them a perspective of how they should reform.
Right.
What is did you have such an experience, and is it very easy to deal with these characters at all?
Yeah, it's
they
called
always
diplomacy.
want to say, we must do this, we must do that, we must bring this change.
Right.
But really, I don't know whether really change happens finally.
So it's interesting, right? So again, it's called diplomacy, but let's say if you understand the mindset of that leader. So let's say, for example, you have a classic case, and you've seen this in a lot of Indian companies. The person says, I'll give you gyan, but he doesn't follow up on what's actually happening. So you just listen, yes, sir, whatever you say is fine, but you do your own thing. And that happens with, frankly, 80% of the Indian organizations. Like, they'll keep the boss happy, give them that little push that, hey, you're smart and you know everything, but we'll do our own thing. So that works very well. The other side is that when you have to deal with someone who's a micromanager, right? So what I found out is that basically when you have a micromanager, you have to make sure that you involve them in your problem, say that, look, okay, sir, you tell me how to solve it. And very often you put the onus on him on success and failure. Because see what happens with the micromanager, he says, okay, look, I want to make sure it succeeds. And and you better make sure it's done. So you say, sir, I think you're smarter than me. Can you help me make it succeed? This is your success. And trust me, they start, in a way, they'll take on a lot of the work from you, frees up your time. So, it's just understanding who the leader is and adapting to that mindset. Yeah. So it works both ways.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akhil. I think we are done with the questions. And this was amazing, Akhil. You really gripped us for almost 45 minutes to an hour, and we just couldn't stop asking you questions. Amazing. I must do a